With only 10 minutes, there's only so much you can say, and I think that we were asked to share a personal narrative. So I'm going to do that. I grew up in a number of different cities. I moved from Cleveland to Atlanta to Minneapolis and then to Florida, and that was through high school. And within those years, I went to 8 different schools. And I would say 4 cities, 8 schools, that doesn't seem to add up. And that was because we were modern Orthodox. My parents believed in observing Shabbat, the Sabbath, and Kashrut, the Jewish dietary laws. And it didn't seem like there was much of a modern Orthodox community, or more importantly, education in a lot of the places that we were living. So I started out in one school where my sister, my brother, and I were 3 of maybe 10 people in the school of a few hundred who actually observed these laws. Even though all of these laws were being taught, we were the only ones who, followed through with that. Then we switched to a new school where came in the first day. I was in 3rd grade. I was wearing sandals, and the entire class that was coming to greet me was pointing at my feet, telling me that I was immodest for showing up without socks. And basically this sort of trajectory went on and on with each school, where I was on one extreme or the other, and I think it sort of helped balance me out to a degree. The 2 places I would say that helped maintain what modern Orthodoxy was to me, what normalcy was to me, was my home, because we shared a lot of the same values, and summer camp, which is probably why it had a major influence on me. Between switching school to school, between my actually doing and believing the same things that other people in the camp believed, and also moving from city to city, this was sort of another rock besides my actual home. And there's a lot to say, obviously, beyond all of that. For high school and for college, I went to all women's institutions. For high school, I went to what I would call a fanatic, right-wing, ultra-Orthodox institution, which they wanted me to sign a contract upon entry saying that I wouldn't wear makeup, that I wouldn't wear skirts. They had a whole list of rules that they established for my application. My mother ripped it up in their face and said, "I'm not hiring a lawyer for my daughter to go to high school." So that was it was an interesting experience. I had to sort of lie to be able to get out of the school because they wouldn't let me apply to college because it was co-ed. So that was an interesting experience. So I started college in the end, skipping a few grades in order to sort of move on with my life at 15 at University of Minnesota. That was an interesting year. I would say I learned a lot about what my faith was the first time where I really interacted with the outside world to an extent. More, I'd say I had a few jobs on the side because going to college was actually much easier than studying 19 subjects like I was studying in my high school. Following that, I went to an all-women's college where I felt really empowered. I felt I was class president, I was on the basketball team, I had a radio show, I ended up being student council president, and by the time I left, I really felt, I can do whatever I want. And a lot of the gender distinctions didn't occur to me, and I think it's because I was in this all-women's environment. It really, until the end, there was an episode that happened where I started realizing that things may be different after, which I'm not going to talk about now, but there was sort of a realization that things were going to change. Jump ahead a few years. I was on the fundraising committee of my synagogue, and after a year of planning different events, we were reviewing the past year to talk about why events were and weren't successful. And there was one event where it was meant to be a sort of Women's Day spa event. And I noted that I think that one of the reasons that the event was not successful was because a man announced it, and it was kind of just awkward having this man who obviously wasn't going to a spa and not going to participate. It was socially awkward, I guess, for this man to make this announcement. So I said, why don't we have one of the women make an announcement? And that's when I found out that our synagogue had a policy that women cannot make announcements. So I thought that was interesting, but I was also starting my PhD. I really didn't have time to sort of take on what I saw as almost a ridiculous rule, and who had the time to deal with that. So I would just bring it up casually in conversation with board members, with ritual committee members, at tables on the Sabbath, and people thought, some people agreed with me, some people disagreed with me, but no one, I was hoping that someone would take this on, and no one did. Towards the end of the year, they decided, the synagogue, to attract new people to have an announcer contest. It was sort of like an American Idol contest, who was going to be the next announcer, which is humorous in itself. And so I applied, because that's an easy way to sort of make the statement that this rule shouldn't exist. So I sent in my email, I applied, didn't get an email back, I called a phone number, I contacted the person who was running this contest in every way that I could. Didn't hear back. A week before the applications were no longer going to be accepted, I wrote on the community board where it was posted, this is your last chance. I said, I emailed, I called, I said, I'm unsure what's going on. Is it because I'm a woman that no one's getting back to me? And within 10 minutes, there was a capital YES exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. This happened about 5:36 in the morning, and I wrote a very lengthy manifesto in about 15 minutes, and I just posted it, and it went up. And all of a sudden, the blogosphere was sort of picking this up, and for about a month, every morning, I just ended up writing something that I maybe should or shouldn't have written, and then it ended up being posted in other places. And at one point, I was excommunicated by the website for 30 days for getting too extreme. So this was an interesting sort of episode, and I can't go into all the details. At the end of the day, the rabbi and I had lengthy conversations, and at first he dismissed me. I brought it up to, my brother's a journalist, so it became news and became a story. It ended up being in the blogosphere in Israel as well. My cousin said, I'm reading about you and your shul, what is going on? So in the end, we had a town hall meeting discussing the role of women. And although there weren't significant changes made, discussion had begun. This rabbi was actually an elderly man, and he's since retired. But it's still an ongoing conversation. I'm pretty proud of the fact that this isn't an afterthought now, that this is something that we question and that we try to change. A second episode since, I guess, my college years, I was the head of a Jewish summer camp. I was actually the third female head in the 40-year history of the camp, and they switched every 2 years. So the fact that I sort of made it took pushing, and there's a lot to be said about that. But there was one morning on the Sabbath where we were reading the Torah, and the sort of innovation that we came up with was that I could make announcements, I could make page number announcements as a woman, because there are a lot of places where I could not, according to Jewish law, participate in public prayer. One of the things that on Sabbath morning that I would do is I would read the Parsha questions about the Torah's portion, and they were really funny. This was sort of the highlight and got all the kids very excited and engaged in Torah reading. And what happened that week was, for whatever reason, the Parsha questions were not printed out, so I couldn't read them. And all of a sudden, here I was, a person who's getting their PhD, who had been in this camp forever, who had worked her way up to being the head of this camp, in charge of 150 plus staff members and 300 campers, whatever it was. And I felt helpless, and now I felt like I had no contribution to the services that morning. I started realizing how minimal my contribution was in general. And I was standing up there on this platform, and I cried. And I sort of put my prayer book, my Chumash, my Bible, in front of my face so people couldn't see. But it was sort of this crisis where I thought, here I am leading, hundreds of people in this ideology, in this movement, and I'm not sure it really makes sense to me, and I'm not really happy with the role that I have in it right now. So I sort of, in between each portion, wiped my face. No one had any idea, but I was going through sort of this crisis, and you couldn't really deal with the crisis when you're in front of hundreds of people. It's a difficult thing to go through. And basically, throughout that day, you kind of have to move things much more quickly in camp. You don't have time to sit down and reflect when you're making sure everything is moving. I thought about it, and it's something that I still sort of think to an extent today, that it wasn't the Orthodox belief in Jewish law and the ideology of Orthodoxy. It was more the Jewish community and the Orthodox community where they stood more socially that I had troubles with. And this sort of inspired my PhD research, which I spent the summer looking at a conservative and Orthodox camp, and the idea being that conservative Jewish law allows for egalitarianism. And I've become more interested in the things that I'm feeling. Is it because I feel restricted by Jewish law, or is it because I'm a woman in society today? And that's really what makes life difficult. And I think I'm ending in the last minute here. So I guess those are a lot of things that are food for thought. I guess there's a lot to say, and it's difficult for me to spring it into 10 minutes. I would say marriage was a challenge for me, not because of my husband, but because I was really scared. I'd gotten married, was considered late in the Orthodox community, 25. And I really felt independent and in control, and I felt like I was going to lose a lot of that with getting married. And if you find the right person, then it can be okay. So my husband really had, even before we were married, spent a lot of time not only just, I would say, not pacifying me, but really understanding what that struggle meant, and he could understand where I was coming from. And that was something that took me a lot of time, even after being married, to say, okay, I'm still my own person and things are okay. And I guess a little bit of news is that we're expecting now. So, yeah. But I think that's something that I'm not sure yet, how that will play out in my role as a woman, my role as a Jewish woman, my identity. So we're all sort of in this state of learning more about ourselves. So thank you for listening.
So it sounds like I'm the only person up here sharing today who actually chose to change a part of their faith since coming to Harvard. I was raised in a very Catholic environment. Both of my parents went to church every Sunday of their lives. My dad went to parochial school through getting his MBA, and when I was young, I kind of always had this spirituality that was really strong, and my brother used to nickname me the parson in the house because I was always pointing out what I thought was right or wrong that was going on. I sometimes would dress up as a priest and break pieces of bread to give to my animals. And it was just, there was something about going to church that I really, really liked. And so by the time I went to high school, this meant that when I had summer recess, I would go to church every single day. And I went to Catholic camp, and I at one point was prayed over to become a nun. I was really seriously considering joining the order. And I became ordained as a Eucharistic minister when I was 16 after being confirmed. And around that time, I really started to question if the Catholic Church was right for me. And that was because at the same time as being really involved in the church, I was also becoming an activist in my community. And part of that was political activism. I was well known for always being really loud, for organizing different kinds of protests and rallies, supporting candidates, knocking on everyone's doors. So everyone knew me as that girl in the school and in my community. And I also was really starting to become involved in peace activism. So both kind of on a national stage as the high school coordinator for the Student Peace Alliance, going to Washington, D.C., talking about legislation for peace for young people, and then founding Kids for Peace, which is an organization that works with youth to promote nonviolence around the world. And I did not feel like who I was as a person was really being accepted in my particular church that I grew up in. It was a very conservative church, and not the leadership itself, but some of the people who I went to church with would just kind of subtly tell me that I was wrong, that whatever candidate I supported or whatever cause I was following would ultimately, I could go to hell for it, or I shouldn't take Eucharist if I supported this candidate or did this action. And so it was at a time in life when, in high school, where a lot of people are just starting to know about themselves, and I was really confused, and I felt like being who I was for myself, the way that I thought God had created me, was in itself kind of a sin. And so I made the decision to stop going to church, which for my family meant that for about a year, people didn't want to celebrate with Christmas or Easter with me because it was a big part of our family's identity that we were Catholic, that it went back as far as we could remember in our history, that everyone was Catholic and this is just who we were and what we did. And so I had a lot of anger, actually, at the church and didn't want to step foot in any kind of church institution. And so when I came to Harvard, I decided to go to everything that was a non-Christian church. And so my first year, I went to Zen Buddhist temples, I went to Hindu temples, I actually found a great community at the Quaker meeting house and really enjoyed going to pray and to kind of find peace there. And then I kind of stumbled upon a faith community at a United Methodist Church that Scott leads, because I was dating someone who went there. And I was really hesitant the first time he invited me to go, because I felt like I would be judged for who I was by being in this community. And it was the first time I ever felt like I was accepted and loved and encouraged to grow for the person I was with God and with this community of Christians. And I loved that. And so I became really involved in this church and grew kind of spiritually since coming to Harvard at this place. And then the other, I guess, big turning point in my faith since coming to Harvard was just about a year ago. My only brother was murdered. And as someone who really I've dedicated most of my life to working for peace, when the headlines came out that he was slaughtered, and they used these terms about just how gruesome it was, that where he was stabbed and how many times he was stabbed, it really shook, again, my spirituality and my faith. And this was the first test. Now I had chosen to be a Christian. I had made the choice that I was going to go to church again and be a part of a faith community. And I saw all around me my family members really questioning, is there a God? And why did this happen to our family? And my grandmother, who faithfully has never missed a single Sunday of church, told me at his memorial, honey, I'm not sure that there's God anymore. And I saw, everyone in my family kind of asking these same questions. And I'm grateful to say I actually never wondered, is there a God, throughout the whole last year, or why did this happen to me? Because I had such a strong faith community at Harvard Epworth Church, where from kind of day one of this process and of grieving, they came to support me and they loved me with what I see as kind of Christ-like love. And when I was asking really difficult questions about trying to reconcile my whole passion for nonviolence and why did something so heinous happen to my brother, this was a place where I was told, you have to have faith in God, and you have to see that that this is kind of part of your journey. Nothing, in my faith tradition, nothing happens by coincidence, really. There's always some other explanation. I really believe that. And so I'm extremely grateful that I found Harvard Epworth Church. It helps me reconcile my social justice kind of work within spirituality. And the kind of three words that summarize my experience growing as a Christian since coming to Harvard are forgiveness, acceptance, and peace. I have been able, by joining Harvard Epworth Church, to forgive some of the anger I had certainly about Christianity, because of some of my experience when I was younger. I've been able to accept who I am as a Christian, and kind of once a Catholic, always a Catholic as well. And I accept who I am as a Catholic, as a Methodist, as a Christian, and I've been able to find peace with who I am as well because of this spiritual journey. So thank you for letting me share.